My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video I want to address a plot hole. And I discovered this potential plot hole from reading through the comments of the Men of the West channel. That's Yoyston. He does Middle-earth videos. He did a video recently on the whole Eagles plot hole. Why didn't they just fly to Mount Doom, blah, blah, blah. I've already done my own video on that. I can link to that in the description. But in the comment section on his video, somebody raised the question of why didn't Sauron just follow Gollum with the Palantir and use that, since he knew Gollum was going to be looking for the ring? Then he could have found the ring easily and, just go grab Frodo and bam, you win. I think that this is kind of a simplistic plot hole, but I think it's at least interesting because if you don't know a lot of the details about how these things work, then you could see why somebody would wonder that. So let's take a look at why this wouldn't have actually worked. So the first main point that I want to make here is the Palantir themselves, the Palantiri, I should say, don't work in the kind of way that a typical crystal ball might work. I've done a video on the Palantir phenomenon, and I'll link to that in the description, but there are a few key points that I'll mention here just for those who don't want to go watch that whole thing, because I go into their history and everything else. Some of the key points about how the Palantiri work: when you're using the Palantiri, their natural kind of use is to communicate with each other, and some more so than others. The stone that was kept at Minas Ithil, which later becomes Minas Morgul, and the one at Minas Tirith, which was previously Minas Anor, have a very close affinity. That's why Denethor and Sauron kind of tend to get intertwined there a bit, because Denethor is using the one that Sauron is, his Palantir is very connected with. But all of them rather easily kind of connect with each other in some sense. They can, contrary to one of the sub comments I saw in that thread, be used to view things other than other Palantiri. Somebody was making the argument that they really only communicate with each other. That's not quite true. They actually can be used to look at other things. We get hints that Denethor was using it to look, say, at Umbar, and he sees that the black ships are coming up the river, and that's why he kind of despairs at the end. So they can be used to look other places and see other things. So then why can't we use it to see Gollum and just follow him to Frodo? Well, as far as the Palantir goes, Sauron can use it to look places, but you do have to know where to look. It's not like, say, the Beast's mirror in Beauty and the Beast, where he can just tell it, show me Gollum, and it just hones in exactly where he wants to go. Now, I mean, he kind of has to direct it to a location, and then he can see what's there. But if he doesn't know where something is, he can't just, mentally go, I want to see this, and the Palantir takes him there. The Palantir is more like a telescope. You use it to view a direction or a place, but it doesn't just show you what you want to see. It shows you where you look. It's a different type of action that it does. So that's one key point. Another key point with the Palantir is it can see kind of through things in a sense, because you can see beyond, say, a mountain, even though you're not higher up than the mountain, but it's not capable of seeing things in the dark. It doesn't light things up for you. You can't, if somebody's wearing clothing, you can't just see inside and see what they're carrying. So there are limits to what the Palantir can do for Sauron. He can't just make it see whatever he wants to, regardless of circumstances. So there are several key aspects of the workings of the Palantiri that indicate limitations that would be relevant. Now, let's look at a few other details that kind of go with this as far as Gollum's own path from Mordor to meeting Frodo, and see why these aspects of the Palantiri make Sauron's job a little harder than what, the comment would suggest. Now, a good deal of what happens to Gollum is speculation, even for Gandalf and the ones who know the most about the goings-on of various things in Middle-earth, because Nobody's, just keeping an eye on Gollum. I say that, but that's actually kind of where I'm going. Sauron does try to keep an eye on Gollum for a while through the use of, his own servants, orcs or whoever they may be, because they rescue him from the woodland realm after Aragorn takes him there, and they try to keep an eye on him, but he gives them the slip. Now, again, some of this is speculative, but we do get the idea very clearly that Gollum was, being used by Sauron, but Gollum was not too happy about that. Of course, he wanted the ring for himself, so he's trying to get his own, you know, he's trying to go off his own way, find the ring for himself, and so he slips from, the watch of whoever it is that Sauron sent to rescue him. So Sauron, on the one hand, could be trusting to his own, servants to make sure that Gollum doesn't get free and do his own thing. So he doesn't really feel the need to just keep an eye on Gollum all the time with the Palantir, which he wants to use for other purposes, like checking on Denethor, checking on Saruman. He's got other things he wants to do with the Palantir other than just constantly be, looking at Gollum all the time. That's not what he wants to be doing. So he has his servants doing that for him. Gollum escapes. How do you find Gollum? He's out in the wilderness. Best case scenario, you could, try to look for a long time and just, try to peer behind every tree until you got lucky and found him. But Gollum makes his way to Moria. And as I mentioned, you can't see in the dark just because you're using a Palantir. So by the time Gollum gets to Moria, there's really no way Sauron can actually find him. Another key point to remember here is Sauron isn't necessarily interested in Gollum because he thinks he's going to lead him to the ring. Gollum tells him about Baggins. He tells him about Baggins and the Shire. But Gollum doesn't know where those things are. So Sauron doesn't really have any reason to believe that Gollum, if left to his own devices or if followed, would necessarily lead him to the ring anyway, because Gollum knows very little about where Bilbo Baggins came from. All he really knows is that he came from somewhere, presumably out in the west, and that's kind of vague. That doesn't help much. And even if Sauron knew enough to find the Shire with the Palantir, that wouldn't necessarily help him find Frodo in the ring, because there's a lot of hobbits in the Shire. What he's going to do? Just search until he finds the one that just happens to be carrying a gold ring? I mean, just doesn't really make any sense. So there's several reasons going there why Sauron wouldn't necessarily even be watching Gollum to begin with, even if, he theoretically could with the Palantir. But again, as I mentioned, Gollum ends up in the Misty Mountains, in the mines of Moria, where he really can't be found given the limitations of the Palantir itself. So Sauron is kind of out of luck. Even if he wanted to find Gollum, by the time he gets into Moria, that ship has sailed. He can't do it. And once he loses sight of him, there's no way to know where he's going to end up, where he's going to come out. Is he going to come out the west side, the east side? From there, where is he going to go? When is he going to do it? And you can't watch both entrances at once, and you can't do it indefinitely because he, like I said, he has to use the Palantir for other purposes. He's got to make sure he keeps his hold on Saruman. He's got to make sure he keeps Denethor looking at all the wrong things, misleading him. So, while theoretically it could be possible that Sauron could have just watched Gollum the whole time, it doesn't really make practical sense. And, sooner or later you do run into the limitations of the Palantir. So I don't think this plot hole really is a plot hole at all. Granted, you do have to have a little more knowledge about how the Palantir works to some extent to understand why that's the case, but also just within the function of the story, we do get the clear idea that Sauron is using the Palantir for certain things, and even the hints that we do get make it fairly clear that the Palantir is kind of a one-track thing. You can't watch 40 gazillion things all at one time. It's when you're communicating with one Palantir to another, that's what they're doing. They're not doing anything else. So to the extent that he has to do that, communicate with some other Palantir, he can't be watching Gollum, and we know he wants to be doing that. So even within the context of the story, we get enough hints to give a pretty good idea why this plot hole isn't really a plot hole. But then when you combine that with the additional knowledge you can get from the appendices, the unfinished tales section on the Palantir, you get a pretty good idea that that really wouldn't have ever worked no matter what Sauron did. So that's kind of my response to that. Before I wrap up, the same person who made the comment about Gollum being a plot hole also mentioned why didn't, or I think it was the same person, and I'll probably never even find that comment again because there's a bunch of comments on the video now. But somebody in that thread at least mentioned also why couldn't he just watch Gandalf? Well, why would he necessarily watch Gandalf? Again, you'd have to know where to look, and if you don't know just offhand where Gandalf moves around a lot, so it's not like it's easy to just find him. So there's that problem. The other thing is, Gandalf even himself tells us that Saruman is the one who really made a study of where the rings were, how to make them, that sort of thing, and he's also the head of the Order. So Sauron would much more naturally be interested in Saruman than Gandalf. Gandalf, though, ends up being the best of all the wizards, acts the least of all the wizards. He's always the most humble. He's in gray, for goodness sake. It kind of speaks to his character. He's always playing in the background in a sense. He's not taking a forward role for the most part. So even if Sauron knew where to find him, why would he necessarily think that following Gandalf around was going to be productive in terms of finding the ring? Gandalf had never made that particular part of the whole enterprise his specific study. He just happens to find out that Bilbo's ring is the ring. It's kind of by luck, as they would call it, Gandalf says. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up briefly too, because it was another issue raised in the same thread for the same reason. So I just wanted to address that point really quickly before finishing. So that is my explanation for why it's not the plot hole that Sauron didn't just keep a eagle eye or a Palantir eye on Gollum the entire time in the hopes of finding the ring. I just don't think that really makes any sense when you take into consideration what we know from the story, and especially once you take into account the additional information you can get on the Palantir about how they function and that sort of thing. So if you enjoyed that, please do give the video a thumbs up. Please do share it around. If you have ideas for other potential plot holes in the Lord of the Rings, raise those in the comments. I'm happy to address that sort of thing as well. And please do subscribe to the channel, or you can follow me on Twitter at JRRTLore. And until the next time, I am the Tolkien Geek signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste.